The economic figures in Sweden for the second quarter in the corona crisis are as bad as they were 40 years ago, but better than in other EU countries. Sweden's government and the state epidemiologist Anders Tegnell from the health authority FHM, who advised them on the coronavirus crisis, are repeatedly accused by critics of not having issued a lockdown to protect the country's economy, and so many COVID-19 deaths that have to be accepted. New figures now show how much the country, with its around 10.2 million inhabitants, is also suffering economically from the consequences of the new pandemic. Despite the comparatively relaxed measures, the economic performance of the EU state plummeted in the second quarter more than it has for at least 40 years. The gross domestic product, the GDP, shrank by 8.6% compared to the previous quarter, as the Swedish Statistics Agency SCB announced in a preliminary estimate last week's Wednesday. Compared to the same quarter of the previous year, the decrease was 8.2%. In the first quarter of 2020, the decline in GDP compared to the previous quarter was only 0.3%. During the global financial crisis at the end of 2008, Sweden's GDP fell only by 3.8%. However, the decline in the Scandinavian country is below the 10.1% by which the German economy fell, according to an initial estimate. And other EU member states have to cope with even greater slumps in GDP, such as Spain with 18.5%, Italy with 12.4% or France with 13.8%. The euro area as a whole fell by 12.1% in spring, the EU by 11.9%. The economic crisis in the first half of the year plays in a completely different league than the horror shows elsewhere in Europe, said economist David Oxley from Capital Economics on the economic development in Sweden of the Reuters news agency. The Swedish statisticians see the main reason for the sharp decline as failing exports and also lower consumptions by private households. Like Germany, Sweden is extremely dependent on foreign trade, and industry suffered and suffers from the interruptions in supply chains caused by the lockdown of other countries. Tourism and gastronomy are also badly affected. The economists of the Swedish financial services group Skandinaviska Enskilda Banken AB, the SEB, assume that the situation will improve soon. GDP is expected to recover in the third quarter, although the strength of the upswing remains uncertain, they write in an analysis. According to the government, unemployment also rose sharply in June to 9.8%, and youth unemployment is even around 32%. According to data from Eurostat, the statistical office of the European Union, unemployment was still 7% in January 2020. In May, it had risen to 8%. Labour Minister Eva Nordmark describes the situation as very serious. It is clear that unemployment will continue to rise. Tegnell always argued against the lockdown. One needed sustainable measures and should not forget that strict bans also have health consequences. Isolation and quarantine could cause long-term harm to the body and mind. In addition, one must also look at the economy. We must not destroy it, he said. The government and FHM in Sweden have relied more on appeals than on bans since the pandemic began. They called on citizens to minimize social contacts and keep their distance. Primary schools, shops and restaurants remained open though. In addition, the following applied from the outset. People should work from home and should definitely stay at home if they have symptoms. A recent study just showed that the proportion of those who work in the home office rose from 15 to 57% in the spring. The health authority extended the home office recommendations for the fall. An important part of the Swedish strategy was to give the elderly special protection. It is now clear that this has failed, at least with regard to those in need of care. Sweden currently has 5,760 COVID-19 deaths and more than 81,500 confirmed infections. That is significantly more victims per 1 million inhabitants than in Germany, we have 110, or in the Scandinavian neighboring countries Norway with 48, Denmark with 106, Finland with 60, or Iceland with 28. The states, which are much smaller in terms of population, had all opted for lockdown. In Sweden, however, the infection rate has apparently calmed down. Since July 6th, the number of deaths has fallen from around 15 per day to 2 or 3 within the days. Another 13 deaths were reported last week's Wednesday. In the middle of the week, there are usually late registrations from the weekend. And if you now want to know more about European politics, YouTube has chosen another of my videos right here for you in the end screen, right next to your chance to subscribe to my channel, which I of course hope you already did. I'll see you in my next video. Click and enjoy. Viel Spaß!